Excellent. So welcome everyone. We're gonna get started. Um, Welcome to Design Thinking London. We're gonna give you a little introduction about who we are, and then we will hand over to Veronica for this really exciting and really topical talk today. I'm a design researcher, so I'm quite excited really about it. So we are Design Thinking London, and we want to be a place where design thinkers of all levels come together and share their practice so we can learn from each other. Oops, hold on a second. Slides. And this is who we are. So I'm facilitating today. I'm one of the co-organizers. My name is Carmen Bryan. And then we have Jason and Lou who are here today. Are my co-organizers, and then we have Anna, who today is not with us, but she helped us with all our social media. And you can actually follow us. We have a Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, and we have now a as well YouTube channel where we put the events that we can record, like the one today. And usually, when we don't have a virus going around, we meet in person. We have different places that align with the values of design thinking, who host us, and we do a wide variety of events. Sometimes it's like today, it's a talk with Q&A at the end. Sometimes we do workshops, and sometimes we do a mix of both. And we're trying to also do that on the online world, but yeah, it's a little bit more challenging. So this is a few guidelines for you today. So please add your name in your Zoom avatar so everyone knows who we're talking to. And during the presentation, please mute yourselves. And if you have questions, you can add them on the Slido, or you can vote as well. When we'll go into Q&A, we prefer that if you want to, you can ask the question. If you're going to ask the question, please switch on your camera. It's nice to see the person we're talking to. And we're also recording the event. So in the case that when you ask a question, you didn't want to be afterwards in the recording, just let us know. We will remove that part. And we have a sponsor, Zebra People. They help us out with paying for the meetup and for this Zoom. And they are also really good at recruiting. They're specialists in all the service design and UX market. So if you're looking for a position, get in touch with them. They will be excited to talk to you. So our next event is also a research one. It's going to be quite exciting. It's mixing quant and qual research for impact. So we will have Fraser and Joe telling us what they are doing to make those two walls work together. So that will be on the 3rd of December. So keep an eye for the event because it's coming up soon. And today, this is the agenda. So we are at the moment in the intro about who we are and what is coming up with Design Thinking London. And then we will hand over to Veronica for her presentation. It's going to take about 40 minutes. And then we will do a Q&A. It will last more or less depending on how many questions do we have. So you guys start putting questions in the Slido. And at the end, we have a little surprise. It's called the waterfall chat. It takes 5 minutes, but if you stick until the end, you will see what it is. And this is the Slido. So please just, we're also gonna put it in the chat. So I think it is already in the chat. So if you have any questions, just don't answer it until the end. Just write it down because as well, some of the people can vote for them. So yeah, just keep the questions going. And I'm gonna hand over to Veronica. But before I do that, let me tell you that Veronica is a service designer and UXer, and she has worked for many different companies: Bupa, Sony PlayStation, Vodafone, British Gas, Channel 4, MOJ, TfL, NHS, and more. And she used to head up customer experience in the agency world, and is now a co-founder of ImpactSense, where they do insight. And I hand over, and she will tell you even more about herself and about the exciting topic of today, which is remote research. Let me stop.
Great, thank you very much, Carmen.
How do I stop?
Cool. Shall I can share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Great. Cool. So hi, everyone. I'm Veronica. So today I'm going to be talking about how we generate valuable insight from remote research, which is definitely not easy to do. But I think this topic is of interest to anyone who has any form of customer engagement in what they do. So could be in UX, could be in service design like I am, or you could be in UI, design thinking, anything that really involves any kind of customer engagement. So as Carmen has said, my background is from UX and service design. I've been involved in design thinking processes from when they first came out. Now I am part of ImpactSense, and everything that we do is around creating actionable insight quickly. You know, I've worked on a lot of projects in the past where you carry out big discover phases or big empathize phases, and you know, you end up creating an analysis presentation, and that insight doesn't always turn into something, it doesn't turn into the outcome or the service output. And that's what we're trying to change now. So it's about how can you provide bite-sized insight that is live, that allows people to do something with it and actually create outcome from that. At ImpactSense, we have two offerings. So one part is around having a customer experience management platform. So this is where we have always on customer insights. So our clients can access customers giving them feedback and insight all the time, plus having that same thing on their competitors. So they've got their competitors' customers giving them insight as well. And then we have some research services where we've taken a lot of the pitfalls from how research is traditionally done and tried to improve those services. So a lot of the research services we do is remote research, which I never thought I would ever say, but that is what we do. And we've worked out ways of doing it well. So I'm not going to talk more about that for now, but that's why we're talking about this topic today. So what I'm going to talk about now is about how we create valuable insight in an age where we have no choice but to carry out remote research. So if we think about, as this is a design thinking meetup, if we actually think about the design thinking process, it involves customer engagement at every stage of the process. And it actually involves different types of customer engagement at each stage. So if you look at the empathize stage, the ideal type of research to do would be to do qual, because that's the best way of empathizing, and that would usually take place face to face. When it comes to the define phase, it may be that you're carrying out proposition testing, or it may be that you want to validate the qual insights that have come out, but at a quant scale and kind of pinpoint it a lot more. So that could be face-to-face, or it could be remote if you're carrying out any kind of quant study. When it comes to ideation or prototyping, it tends to involve co-creation. In fact, a lot of these is where customers don't get as heavily involved, but they can add a lot of value. And so when you're carrying out customer insight and you're co-creating, that usually happens face-to-face as well, either through co-creation workshops or one-to-one sessions. And then when it comes to testing, it could be proposition testing, it could be feature testing, it could be usability testing, whatever kind of testing that is being done, that could be done through face-to-face or remote, but a lot of the times it is happening qualitatively and face-to-face. So what we see is that a lot of research, a lot of customer engagement happens face-to-face. And actually, when we think about why you would ever do remote research, it's usually down to these three things. And the main reason being that you might want to carry out some quant research, and therefore you need scale. You need to reach audiences that are hard to reach. So could be based on the fact that you need a cross-section of a location. It could be that they're a very niche audience that don't live anywhere near to where you are going to be running sessions, and therefore you need to do some remote sessions. With remote research, it tends to be more time efficient and cost efficient as well, because you're not asking people to travel anywhere. You might run shorter sessions. You don't need to run hour-long sessions. It may be that you just run 10-minute sessions or 10-minute studies, and therefore the cost would be lower as well. So these are obviously three great benefits of doing remote research. And actually, one of the reasons why research is rarely done is because of time and cost. It's hard to fit into the process. So that's a real benefit to be able to do this, and hopefully it encourages a lot of organizations to carry out more research than what they were carrying out before. The problem with these benefits is they don't really show that there's any they're not benefits that are about the depth of insight that you get or the quality of insight. They're just really quite functional benefits. So that's why we want to deep dive more into how do you get that insight depth that you get from qual, and how can you do that remotely when you don't have a choice. So right now with COVID, your options are carry out remote research or do none. So how do you do that? And that's what we're going to cover off. So if we think about service design practices and design thinking practices, when you do carry out any form of research, usually the things that you're trying to discover, you're trying to understand a bit more around people's behaviors, people's emotions, and the environment and the context that they're in. I'm sure there's lots of other reasons as well, but these tend to be the three things. It may be that you want to ask very specific questions. But if these are the three things that research is most commonly used for, then we can see why these would benefit from physical research methods. Obviously, if you're trying to empathize and you're trying to, understand the emotions that people are going through, the best way of doing that is through human-to-human contact. And you can build a better relationship by being face-to-face in front of someone. Of course, with behaviors, we know that people say one thing and do another. That theory has been around for a really long time. And if we're trying to understand behaviors, the best way of understanding behaviors is, of course, to observe. But it's very difficult to observe remotely. So we need to consider that. And then when we think about context, actually context has some benefits of being remote, because in some cases, you're not taking people out of their natural environment. In some cases, they're in their natural environment, but you're not. So you've still got something to consider there, because you're not in their environment. But at least they are. A lot of the times when you do user testing or you do one-to-one interviews, you're actually taking people out of their natural environment anyway, and you're taking them into a lab, or you're taking them into a place that doesn't feel relatable to the topic they're talking about anyway. So there are some pros and cons there. But these are the things that we need to tackle. So when we're looking at what remote research needs to do, where it needs to work harder, it is in those three things. But there's also two additional ones that I've put in here. So the two additional ones are around ensuring participant authenticity, because it's very easy to not be a real person or not come across as a real person when you're carrying out remote research. And also being able to ensure that you are being inclusive, because we know that some people can't use technology in the way that we may be running sessions. So these are the 5 things to tackle and to consider. I would also be interested if anyone's got any other areas that they think remote research needs to work harder on as well. So maybe add that even on Slido as some comments, because it would be good to share. I'm going to go through each of these and give just a couple of examples of things that can be done. Some of these are quite micro examples. Some of them you might already know, but you know, there's lots of things that can be done here. And again, I'd love to have conversations with anyone who is interested in kind of having conversations around these kind of things as well. So please feel free to add extra things that you can share with everyone else on Slido. For me, I know that a lot of the people that are here now today are experts in these topics as well. So if you've got anything to add it so that everyone else can see too. So if we actually think about how we can empathize remotely, yes, we know it's difficult. The first thing here is to make sure that you're using the right tools and the right methods. So obviously qualitative research would be better at allowing you to empathize, and you can do qual research remotely, and it can feel similar to face-to-face, because you've obviously got video, you can have face-to-face engagement, you can ask questions, but you're not there together. So one way of doing it is obviously using qual methods, but there's a lot of things you can do that go beyond those traditional methods remotely. So you can use imagery and get responses around that and understand how people emotionally respond. You can ask them how they feel when they see certain images. It depends on what you're testing or what you're trying to get feedback on, but there's a lot that can be done here, and it's not just down to carrying out qual research. You know, we've worked with tools that allow for psychological segmentation, so you don't even need to ask people questions around which category they fit into psychologically, and by knowing that already through these tools, you can then deep dive into certain areas. So there's a lot that can be done here by what tools you use and what methods. And again, there's a lot to get through, so I'm not going to focus on that too much, but if there is any conversations that you want to have around that, can do anytime. The second point is to take time to warm participants up. I really do believe that when you carry out remote research, time is of the essence. So what tends to be common practice is you go straight in with hard questions. The problem, you would never do that when you're face-to-face. You always start with an intro, you always ask some kind of warm-up questions that get them comfortable, that they know how to answer. And if you can afford to do that remotely, make sure that you keep that up. If it's a 5-minute poll or a 2-minute poll, of course you're not going to do it for that. But if you are running slightly longer studies, even if it's done on a quant scale, it's really important to do that so that they get into kind of feeling the vibe of the session. And then thirdly, it sounds obvious, but you just need to ask the right questions. So if you're running face-to-face research, if you get the question wrong or they don't understand what you're asking them, it's very easy to ask them another question or explain. You can't do that all the time remotely if you're not running face-to-face remote sessions. So you've really got to make sure you're asking the right questions. The way to do that is to first of all stress test the questions. So if you're running a quant study with 1,000 people, maybe you want to test it with 100 first. And it's not to test, you know, what insight you're getting back. It's to make sure that the insight that you are getting back is valuable to you before you scale it up and pay for however many more. The other thing to do with asking the right questions is make the questions easy to answer or make them true to answer. So don't ask hypothetical questions, and this is kind of just research best practice. But instead of asking, how would you feel in this scenario, ask, how did you feel when you went through this? And then you're going to get more accurate results. So, you know, don't ask questions that they're not necessarily in that mindset there and then, and therefore the kind of ways that they're answering it isn't quite right. The second bit that I'm going to go through is around how we can understand behaviours through remote research. So I've mentioned it already, it's almost impossible to observe live behaviour. So what can you do instead to understand behaviour? Well, I think the key here is to use unprompted data, and there's lots of different ways you can do that. So if you ask someone how they behave, they're not necessarily going to tell you the right answer, or they might feel the pressure, they might not know, they'll answer something, and you might use that and use it wrongly. So try and use different data forms. So when we talk about customer engagement in research, it doesn't mean running sessions, or it doesn't mean running a study. It could just mean accessing data that's already out there. So the first point here is to use voluntary public data. There's so much out there online that you could access. And we do this a lot. So we have IBM Watson tools that we have customized, and we can scrape a lot of things out there. So let's use the example of, if you're working in hospitality, you know, you should be scraping TripAdvisor, obviously. If you're working with a telco, you should be scraping app stores. If you're working with the NHS, you might want to, on a certain project, you might want to scrape Mumsnet. You know, there's so many things out there, Money Saving Expert, there's so many sites out there that people are collaborating on and sharing how they're behaving, and they're giving tips to other people of what to do. That information should not be lost. And in the past, we've always used that data, but we've always used it, I've always personally used it quite manually, where we'll scan through comments and see what people are saying and try and analyze it. Really, you're getting a tiny, 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 tiny view of what is going on. So ideally, you'd use scraping tools, and what that gives you is quant. Well, it gives you qual at quant scale, and that's a great way of understanding behaviors. And the second thing here is to run trigger-based studies rather than time-based ones. So don't set up sessions. If you're trying to understand behaviors, don't set up sessions that are time-based. So don't say, right, we're going to meet next week, 9 to 10, I've got a session with you. 10 to 11, I've got a session with someone else, 11 to 12. Because they're not going to behave in the way that you want them to behave in that 1 hour session that you've got. So if you're trying to understand behaviors, what you want people to do is participate after they've done a certain action. So you might want to trigger something off. So the obvious example is diary studies. But even then, a lot of the cases, diary studies are fill this in every morning, or instead of doing it manually, and you know, there's so many apps out there now where you can trigger these kind of things. So you can be running a trigger-based study using WhatsApp, and people are interacting, and you can send reminders, and they can upload photos, and they can say how they felt there and then. You know, use tools that exist today, but run trigger-based studies if you're trying to understand behaviors. And then the third example I've got here is to ask specific questions post behavior. So if you've got access to analytics, great, use it. And if you can try and find people who have behaved in a certain way that you want to understand more about that behavior that you've seen through the analytics, then you segment by that behavior type. And then you can dig deeper to find out why they've behaved in that way, or how they've done it. But what you don't want to do is ask people how they're behaving. What you want to do is ask them why they've behaved a certain way. Then I was going to just quickly talk about context. So I don't think context is as relevant in all scenarios of when you're carrying out research. A lot of the times it is, but some of the times it's not. Sometimes being in your own environment helps in kind of the feedback that you give, and giving a more accurate view of what's going on. Other times it might not be relevant. So if context is important, then ask questions about context is the first point. If it's not relevant, then take it out, because carrying out remote research, as I said, is time sensitive, and you don't want to waste time on this if it doesn't impact the findings. If it is important, the second point here is take participants out of their home and into their context. So if you're carrying out ethnographic research, usually you would be following that person around. You would be, if you're looking at, if you're working in the automotive industry and someone is interested in buying a car, you might want to take them to the dealership. or you might want to follow their activity online. But if you're taking them to the dealership, you don't have to be there. In fact, it might be more natural for them if you're not there. And there's so many research tools that you can use now, as I've mentioned before. WhatsApp is one example, but there's so many apps that you can use where you can engage with them and still follow them around, but follow them around remotely and then get some feedback afterwards. And then the third point here is make sure that you only research with participants who are actually going through what you need them to go through. I've seen so many cases of where the recruitment criteria widens because you're not getting enough people in the criteria that you need. And the issue with that is you won't get accurate results necessarily. So let's say, for example, you wanted to people's experiences when they're pregnant. If you widen it to people who were pregnant, who have children who are 5 years old now, they're not going to necessarily remember how they felt or acted. So another example here is if you're working in the travel industry and you want to speak to people who are booking holidays because you want to look at the booking holiday journey, as an example, you want to make sure that they're actually going to book a holiday. So if you ask the question, we want to get people who are interested in booking a trip in the next 12 months. Well, that's actually a lot of people. But are they interested in booking a trip now? And if they're not, then they're also not in the mindset, and they're also not going through it. So they're not necessarily going to tell you how they feel and how they would act. I understand that there's the other case of, if we don't have enough people to take part in research, is it not better to widen the criteria than to not have people? Well, I guess so, yes, but you've got to be very wary of the insights that come back from that, and at least separate out people who are going through it in this stage versus this stage. And now I actually work in specifically research and recruitment. I really do believe it's not that hard to recruit even niche customer bases, and I do think it's all doable. So how do you ensure participant authenticity? Well, I mentioned this already, but it's very difficult it's very easy to come across as not a real person remotely. So especially if you're taking part in a quant study rather than doing face-to-face remote sessions. So the first point is to make sure they are a real person. If you're not in the recruitment industry, it's not your job. It's the recruitment's job to make sure that they're real, or the survey partner that you're working with, or whoever it may be. But what is your job is to look out for triggers and patterns in the data that suggests that a percentage of them are not real. So an example of not being real could be that people take part in a study and they just go, yeah. No. Or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can tell that they've finished the study in 1/10 of the time of what they should be taking. So that would be your job, to really look for that data. And really, I don't think you should be paying for that data because it's not accurate. But it's your supplier's job, and this is what we do, to make sure that you do things like restrict IP addresses, because people will take part in multiple studies because they're getting paid, and that's always been an issue that I've had. So we've made sure that we, as a supplier, don't have that. We don't allow people to with the same IP address to take part in the study more than once, or more than one study. We can block panels, and there's other human gates that we go through as well to make sure they're real. So if you're working with a recruitment agency, ask them about how they make sure this is happening, because the industry does need to change in this area. The second point here is to make sure that they actually are the real segment of what you've asked for. So the first point is make sure that you're creating the right criteria. So you've said, we want these people like this, and make sure that's right. Make sure you're not just using typical market segments. Try and use behavioral and psychological factors that you know would have an impact on how people behave and how they feel. So it's your job to create that right criteria, but then it's the supplier's job to make sure that they bring in those people that actually match that profile. So something that we do, and again, you could ask suppliers for this, is usually when people join a panel, they fill in some pre-qualification questions. What you want to make sure is that they are re-qualified again. So using the pregnancy example, or being a student, you're not a student forever, you're not pregnant forever. Therefore, if you're recruiting panels based on that, you need to make sure the data is up to date in how they recruit. And the way to do that is to re-ask regularly, and to re-ask when they're taking part in the study as well. And then thirdly here is to make sure that they're not presenting a biased view. So, you know, best practice in research when you're running sessions, especially when you do them face-to-face, is to say, please be as honest as you can. We want to know the good and the bad, and we're not going to penalise you for telling us all of this stuff. You know, that's kind of best practice, and that's great. But saying that and getting people to do it are two different things. If you want people to do it, you need to look at the way that you ask certain questions. Make sure there's no leading questions. Make sure you think about the phrasing and the way you do that kind of stuff, which is also best practice. But when you're doing it remotely, there's some visual cues that you really need to think about if you're influencing them. So you really need to think about your question delivery. We've seen examples of where companies have asked NPS questions. An example of an NPS question is, or the NPS question is, how likely would you recommend this to friends and family? I'm sure everyone here has gone through those kind of questions before, and those kind of surveys before, and you score between 0 and 10. We've seen examples where it's reversed, so you score 10 first and 0 last. We've seen examples where they've used the numbers with color codes. So 1098 is green, 7654 is amber. You know, all of that kind of stuff influences how people score. So you need to really think about the way that you visualize that as well, not just the way that you ask the question. And then finally, enabling inclusivity through tech adoption. So the first point here is to set expectations. So even when you carry out face-to-face research, you have people who don't turn up even if they're being paid to take part in studies. With remote research, the same with running remote sessions like this today, the number of people that sign up and the number of people that turn up is a lot lower. So you want to try and reduce that as much as possible. And that's the same with if you were running remote research. So if you want to try and reduce bounce rates, one of the things to do is to make sure people aren't feeling overwhelmed when they log in. You need to explain the need, what your ask is before they're signed up, so that when they're actually going through the process, they're not like, oh, no, this is way too much. I wasn't expecting this. So make sure you set expectations, first of all. One thing that we actually do here is we run, if we're recruiting for our clients, we actually check that the participants know how to use the technology before we run kind of sessions with them first, especially if it's, well, only when it's qual, and then you know that they're going to turn up to the session, and then it doesn't waste our clients' time. So again, ask for these things. Second point here is you want to leverage platforms that people are already using. So actually, COVID has done us a huge favor, because more people are using Zoom, more people are using Microsoft Teams, more people are using House Party. You know, people are using technology now more than they ever have before. So try and use platforms that don't require downloads, don't require logins, and that you can use platforms that they may already know and use. So I was having a conversation actually with experts in ethnographic research the other day, and they actually wanted to use an app that that their participants don't use, so that it's an app that you use just for when they're taking part in this ethnographic research study. You could do that. I understand the value in doing that, but I do think you'll get higher bounce rates and you'll lose more people. If you want to be a bit more inclusive, try and use things. I would use things that that they already have and that is common. And then the third point here is try and educate. So give participants the opportunity to be walked through what is asked of them in advance. So don't assume that older people don't know how to use technology and younger people do, because we've worked with a lot of younger people that don't and a lot of older people that do. So don't assume, and make sure that you're getting walked through that. And then I guess I've kind of talked about this quite broadly because there's so many different research methods that you could use. So just a couple of quick tips that I would use for when you carry out quant and qual. When you're carrying out quant remotely, think about survey fatigue. Just think about how many times you get asked to take part in a survey every time you interact with a service. But I get about 20 a week. And then think about how are you going, you're just another survey. So really you need to think about time to value ratio. I would think about how you minimize effort, keep it as short and sweet as possible when you're doing these kind of surveys, and maximize what the participants get out of it. So mostly surveys that you get asked to take part in, you don't get anything. They're free surveys from clients because they have your customer details, they know you've interacted with them. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be money. It could be something to do with a service that gives them a benefit, or it could be giving them feedback after the survey to know how other people felt. Whatever it is, it's giving them some kind of value. Avoid repetition of question format. So if you keep asking the same type of question one after the other, so it could be rate this from 1 to 5, rate this from 1 to 5, rate this from 1 to 5. You're going to increase fatigue, number one, but also increase the chances of participants not being genuine. And they might have actually been a genuine participant, but they're getting bored with a survey, so they just click whatever. So think about how you make that a bit more dynamic and less boring. And then there'll always be some responses that you need to eliminate. So make sure that you don't include that in your insight when you're looking through the data. So do think about that when you're doing it at quant. At quant level, you're going to get some that aren't necessarily real. And then when it comes to qual, the way I like to think of qual when you do it remotely is to think of it as a new method. Don't think of it as the same method as when you do qual face-to-face, because you do have to treat it quite differently. So, building a relationship takes longer. Qual doesn't just mean one-to-one sessions, which is what we're typically used to when you run face-to-face sessions, or it doesn't just mean, typical ethnographic. Like, think about how you can scrape qual insights from everything that's out there already and maximize it in that way. That's just one example, but make up your own methods that you can get qual insight from. And I think when qual is done remotely, you can actually almost scale it a bit more, because the qual sessions might be shorter, you don't have travel time, as I mentioned. You might be able to run more sessions than what you would have done in the same amount of time if it was face-to-face. And then just I guess I've got 8 minutes left before we move on. So just to give some examples of some of the things we do at ImpactSense and how we get out value from remote research. One of the things I mentioned at the beginning was that the value of remote research is that you can do scale and with reduced time and reduced cost. So don't necessarily pay for the same fees that you would pay if you were to do them face-to-face. Like, you can do it faster and you can do it more cost-effective. I think one of the things that when I had worked with research partners in the past or recruitment agencies was, now I work in this area, looking at the profit margins that are made on it is crazy. Things like they charge for incompletes as well as completes. So if someone takes part in half the survey or they get disqualified, they still charge you for that. I think that's totally unfair. So think about these kind of things. And also, one of the things that I think we bring value in is as researchers and even as recruitment, we're practitioner specialists. So I think it's important to make sure you've got someone who can interpret the data in the right way, but also challenge you on some of your scripting in some cases. So if you've created a script, a lot of the times when you work with a survey partner, if there's a typo in there, they won't even correct it. It will just go out how you've created it. So just getting any kind of feedback or having someone to bounce ideas off of when you're scripting helps. But also having someone do the scripting for you is also great as well. Having access to a large panel is valuable as well. So we work with quite a lot of niche clients. So, you know, don't be shy to ask for a very specific criteria if you want to. It may be that you don't want to ask for, you might want Gen Pop, but you know, being able to ask for that kind of segmentation detail gives you more accurately the customers that you're looking for, and I think it's important to ask for those kind of things as well. And then I mentioned earlier, like not restricting the kind of methods you use. So don't just think of quant as surveys and qual as one-to-one or ethno. Like think of all the things that you can do and all the different methods that you can engage with, and you can do all these remotely. And if we think about the design process that we've talked about, you know, you're involving customer engagement all the way through. There's lots of things that you can co-create with customers that isn't just in a workshop. You know, you can do things like price elasticity, you can get some market sizing going, you can look at how you validate the business case and know that what you're creating is going to have a certain outcome. With Qual, you can do prototype evaluations, you can run co-creation workshops remotely, but there's loads of different things you can do. So just think about how you can come up with new methods as well, and then there's a lot of platforms out there that can help you do that. And yeah, and then the other thing that we do that I sort of mentioned is the way that you scrape. So one of the things that we do is scrape everything that's out there. We don't just scrape where customers have commented on things. You know, scraping media and news is important because the news has an influence on how people feel. So segmenting in all these different formats is important. And then one of the things that we can do is apply psychological sentiment on top. So it doesn't just scrape and say these are the kind of words that people are talking about. We can actually understand these people are angry and this is how they're feeling, and we can group them in this way, and then understand how people who are responding in this way are feeling like this. Language translation and things like that as well, but also being able to translate audio to text. It means that if you run qual sessions, you could get analysis on those qual sessions very quickly. It can be transcribed and then analyzed using IBM Watson. I always believe in the human layer on top. So I don't believe that you should use these tools standalone and then take everything and then say, right, great, this is what it's given me. I do believe that adding that human layer on top is important. But instead of spending days and days and days rewatching videos and going through all this stuff again, you get that initial analysis done, and then you apply another layer on top that you know, that a service designer or someone working in design thinking might want to take. Because the reason why I think that's also important is because if you're taking it through into the design process, you need to be able to empathize with that analysis and the data that's come through. And I think when you're part of that process, then you can ideate and come up with great ideas. So I think we're going to open up for really good timing for questions and comments. The one thing I just wanted to add before we do that is, if this was a face-to-face event, we would usually have the opportunity to chat afterwards, and I would love to chat to everyone here. So if you did want to have a catch-up, I've got a link to my calendar, and we can book some time in. We can have a half-hour chat, and maybe you want to chat about this more. You want to share some of your views on what I've talked about today, or if you can't be bothered to write this link out, just find me on LinkedIn and we can have a chat there. So yeah, I haven't seen Slido, so I don't know if any questions have been asked, or any comments. Okay, good. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing now, just so that I can see faces, because I can't see any faces at the moment, and it would be great for me to see that. Cool.
So the first one is Jason. Jason,
okay.
you lead the way. Can you ask your question?
Excellent. Thanks for the talk, Veronica. That was great. Thank you. I was very interested in the idea of using WhatsApp to do the study. That sounded really interesting. I don't know. Could you expand a bit more on how you've run sessions like that?
Yeah. So in the past, worked with a pharma company, and we knew that we were looking at customer to healthcare professional relationship, and in the country that we were doing the study in, it was actually that WhatsApp was a tool that was used, strangely, between healthcare provider and patient. So using those kind of tools that we know people are already using is a great way of then kind of keeping that engagement going, because that's the channel that they're already using. But it doesn't need to be just because that's the channel they're already using. It could be that it's just part of the study that, if you're running, I would use something like WhatsApp for something more like ethnographic research. So something where you are asking people to, it's trigger based, and they're in their natural environment, and you can send out messages to them and say, has this happened yet today? And you could get a response. You could say, don't forget to put a photo up after you've done this. It's just triggers that you would never have the opportunity to do if you were face to face, or if you were doing ethnographic research, because you wouldn't live with them necessarily for a week. And if you would, that would be a very expensive study.
Or I suppose, when you get to the supermarket, could you put on your video or send me a message and share something?
Exactly, a voice note,
audio note or something like that.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Like, it brings so many different media forms into one simple thing to use. And the other benefit of doing that is you can actually ask, as part of your segmentation questions, you could ask if people already use WhatsApp. So then you've got an idea of, I wouldn't necessarily exclude people that didn't, but then at least you've got an idea of how natural it feels when they're interacting with the app.
Fantastic. There is a related question that Helena, if I've said your name right, Helena's asked.
I was going to say that, Helena, if you can ask your question. Would you like to ask your question?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here. Lovely. I really enjoyed it today, Veronica. And I just want to ask, are there any issues between the use of GDPR and WhatsApp that you had to consider? So that WhatsApp are within the boundaries of GDPR rules when you're doing user research?
Yes. So yeah, there are things definitely to consider with GDPR. In fact, everything that we're doing, we've got to heavily think about GDPR, because we create panels for clients as well. So, we're holding data with contact details and things like that. But I think one of the things to note is that these studies are temporary, and we delete, details after. And we do have GDPR, NDAs and things like, we have policies that we have to follow as well.
Can I ask?
I personally don't deal with that side of things within ImpactSense, but it is dealt with.
Because I work with big clients, like big names, yeah, and they wouldn't let me use. I don't think they would let me use WhatsApp. The legal departments wouldn't.
So,
because
yes,
it's like,
you are right.
Yeah, I agree. Also, like, where it's cloud stored data and they don't feel comfortable with it. So
one of the things that we do is we don't recruit. We recruit based on our own panel access. So we don't get data from clients a lot of the times. So it's not the client's database. So we're not interacting with existing customers and they haven't given us access to those people. We are finding people that are a combination of prospects or existing, because we access our panels and ask them, have you interacted with this brand, and can we speak to you in this way? So it's definitely very different to say working with a bank and asking them if we can have access to their customer base.
Definitely.
That's actually one of the values of I think how we go about doing things is we're accessing stuff from public data, and we're accessing people outside of the client's CRM database. So most of the time, not all the time, we don't touch their CRM data with what we do.
Okay.
Does that, Helena, does that answer your question? Or?
yes, it does. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so then Raphael, would you like to ask your question? Maybe.
Well, you could ask it.
I can ask then. So he's asking, what non-digital, as in not using a phone, a computer or internet, remote research tools do you recommend? Is any tools that you can use?
If you're not using what? Sorry, if you're not using any technology.
Yeah, if you're not using a digital kind of device, let's say, not a phone, not a computer, not internet, what kind of things would you use?
We've done studies in the past where you would send out kits to people and they would take part in the study that way. So it's pen and paper. It's, you can post a disposable camera and get them to send stuff back. So we've run those kind of studies before as well. And in some cases, those studies are very important. We don't do them as often because they are more timely and more costly, but depending on the customer base and the audience, we could run those. So yeah, it does depend on, like, obviously we want to be inclusive. It depends on what customer base we're targeting as to whether we do those kind of studies.
Thank you. So the next one, Jason again.
Hi again, thank you. Started your talk, you mentioned around psychological tools you were using.
Yeah.
Twofold. I'm kind of interested in what exactly are you looking at? You mentioned psychological sentiment, and then I think there was something else really.
Segmentation.
Yeah. I was just keen to know a little bit more about that and what you're looking, how you're segmenting from that pool of information.
Yeah. So there's a tool that we use called Gorilla. Worth looking them up. So we've worked with a client of ours who was looking at they were looking at employee experience, and they were looking at fear in the workplace and how that can affect productivity and how that can affect outcome of what you're doing. And so we ran a study with them that was kind of, again, it's kind of like this hybrid between qual and quant, where, you know, if you do it with 180 people or 80 to 100 or whatever that may be, it's kind of in between quant and qual, because you get in the depth of qual but at slightly larger numbers. And through that, we actually got to segment by fear. So you can do certain tests where, for example, you could get them to do a test, get them to do a maths test under time pressure, a quick test, and you can see how different people respond in different ways. So you're actually getting behavior out of it, and you're getting their psychological profiling from these kind of tests. There's loads of different ways you can do it, but that's just an example.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, so the next one is.
I do also want to open up for anyone. There might be other questions, but I also, if anyone else wants to comment on any of these things, it'd be good to share with everyone as well. If you've got any examples, or
Definitely, you know, we have the raise hand as well. So if you guys want to say something, or you know, just pitch in. So the next one is anonymous, so I will ask for this person.
Okay.
How can you do good remote ethnography? Any tips?
Yes. So remote ethnography is the hardest thing to do. So I would say, because you can't pick up in the same way or on those micro behaviors. So you can't observe someone and see, you know, see an opportunity of what you could do to fix that thing. But what you can do in the examples I've given is use apps and tools and kits, home kits and things like that, to encourage people to provide insight. So you would ask them to take photos of things when they're feeling like this, and you can ask them questions as they're going through something, and you can be there on the other side as they're going through a journey. So there's no issues doing that. It's not quite the same. But as Jason mentioned in the supermarket example, if you were interacting with them through a messaging app, you've got audio, you've got video, and you've got photos, and you've got text, and you can interact with them in all those ways and almost be there, and almost observe their behavior. Not quite, because you are relying on them giving you the information at the right time in the right way, but it's almost there.
Can I ask? So basically, in a way, you're not there. I mean, if you were doing it live and you were basically on the other side and you were watching, they were sharing with you what they're doing with the video feed. Somehow it has some advantages, because if you were in person, you are more present because they see you. In this way, you are a bit more invisible, and you could still ask questions at specific points, isn't it? Like, so it
absolutely intrusive. At the same time, they can skew it a little bit more, because they can provide you the right image that they want to provide you with, or they can kind of skew it a little bit more if they wanted to. But I do find it less intrusive, and you know, they're more free and more comfortable to go through their journey without feeling the pressure of a stranger being there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it has this, obviously you won't see it the same as if you were following them, but
absolutely, yeah, it's not quite the same. This is what I mean when I say, like, when you do qual remotely, think of it as a new method rather than trying to recreate the method that you've always used, because you're not going to create ethnographic research in the exact same way of how traditionally you would carry it out if it was face to face. but there are benefits of doing it this way, and then make sure you maximize that and change it a bit so that it feels, you know, you're making the most out of the tools that you're using, and you're benefiting from the fact that you're not there and you're not a stranger.
Perfect.
So yeah.
Related to this, my question didn't get so many votes, but I actually got to chip in now. And it's kind of like, how do you ensure participants' engagement in this? Exactly because of this you know, not being face to face. So you said about the good things and the pros, but what about the cons on this? For example, you know, we see a lot of comments, for example, on social media, let's say, like sometimes a bit more aggressive because there is a screen and there is no face-to-face sort of relationship. So saying the same, but you know, how do you sort of soften these kind of way where you actually have only a screen as a medium between the participant and the researcher?
So your question is, how do you increase customer engagement in research? And
from the participant point of view?
Yeah, from participants' perspective, especially when they've had a negative experience.
No, sorry, especially when you know, face to face. So you know, the filter of a screen, let's say, it can kind of like a, I know.
Yeah, it's a bit controlling, isn't it? Like, people control more easily because they're behind the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe they disengage more, you know, simpler.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a plus, really, because people are being more honest than what they would do if they felt the pressure of you being there face to face. So in a way, I think having the screen there allows them to be more free. If they're being extremely negative, I mean, I would imagine that most participants wouldn't be doing it just for a laugh. So I imagine that if they are being aggressive, then it's because they are really angry with the service that they've experienced. And therefore you're getting the true experience of what they've had, rather than if it was face to face, they might just say, yeah, I really dislike them. So yeah, I mean, I guess aggression, you have to take it, so like how you deal with that is important, but taking the analysis of that, you're probably actually going to get more real, true views. But then in terms of the scraping side of things, if you're talking about, like, you know, people tend to write more negative reviews rather than positive reviews because they only do something when they're really pissed off. I generally believe that it's changed now, like with TripAdvisor and things like that. Like, you know, if you've had what you tend to get is the extremes rather than the neutrals. So if you've got the extreme happies and the extreme pissed offs, then you've got both sides. What you haven't got is the neutrals, which a lot of the time is the kind of bulk of a lot of services. It's actually something that we look at. So when we look at our relationship experience platform, we look at when we've actually, so one of the things that we had to do, this is slightly off topic, but we had to look at, we've looked at how do you break down customer experience, like what actually makes up customer experience. And the way that we found that out was to ask customers in different sectors, tell us about brand you love, brand you feel neutral about, and a brand you hate. And then you can see what people are talking about when they talk about neutral brands, when they talk about the two extremes. And so I think if you're not getting your neutral data from scraping, because the review sites have the two extremes, then recruit neutrals and run quant sessions with them. Combine the prompted and unprompted data.
Cool, thanks.
Sorry, that was a bit long form, but I don't know if that answered.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. So the next one again is anonymous, but So I know it's me. Actually, it's me. So any tips on how you recruit niche participants? Because actually this is something I struggle sometimes, and even my recruiters struggle with niche participants.
Yeah. So yes, go with recruitment agency, first of all, that has a huge panel. That helps. So when they have a huge panel, they can they should be able to segment niche level. The other thing you can do is build up referral schemes. Like, one of the things that I would recommend for a client, if they had a niche customer base, is potentially think about creating a panel yourself, because once you run research with a niche customer base and they're not a large enough segment of the population, then you may want to reuse them for more research, or you may want them to tell you about other people who also sit in that niche customer base. So we do things around that. So we look at referrals, we look at different ways of finding that niche customer base, like going to where they are and accessing our panel and growing it from there. But I think don't compromise on your customer base. Don't be like, this is niche, so we're going to widen it. Sometimes.
Okay. No, I don't like doing that.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. So I don't know if
Can I ask a question off that?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you say don't widen that, what about proxies? So I've worked on something like a tax tribunal where you needed to find people who had taken HMRC to court, for example. So that was getting super niche.
Very niche.
Yeah, it was very niche, and it was during was it Purdah? So when there's an election, so it was very hard to recruit as well. But we had to look at creative ways to get hold of people, and then you started to have to get some insights. So we started to look through accountancy firms and seeing if we could do that.
Yeah. So so definitely, obviously, go to the places. So you've already done that. Go to the places where those customer bases might be. But actually, I agree with your point, and I'll take back what I said, which is when I say don't widen it, I think you should widen it to get more insight for sure, but know what that insight is, or know that isn't the exact customer base. Sorry, I should have actually said that. So, if you're going to widen it, yeah, you'll get more insight, and that's great, but know the differences and know where they're not providing you the insight that you need, or know where it doesn't correlate to what your customer base would do. So if you had a smaller niche base and you expanded it, or you found industries that correlated in a similar way, you might want to do testing or research with them, and then just make sure you identify the differences. Sorry, I agree with you.
No, I think that's it. The essence for me there is exactly that thing of knowing its proxies. It's not the actual users you want to speak to, but and that's the caveat, that when you're using that, you need to be aware of. But at least it gives you some information to inform you, so you can move on and create those actions.
Yeah, exactly.
We can do one more question, and then I think we can, because I see people are dropping, so probably time to end. But Mike, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, please. Hello. It actually follows on nicely from that conversation about sort of small group and niche groups of sort of participants. I transitioned into a product design role last year. So for me, conducting user research is still like a skill I'm sort of in the early days of developing. And one of the things that I struggle with is we have a small customer base of about 30 to 50 businesses. And maybe one or two people at each business that we need to kind of, we need to tap that kind of resource for our qualitative kind of insight. And sometimes we might only have chance to maybe speak to 3 or 4 participants for a particular round of work that we've got on the go. And so one of the things that I'm trying to figure out how to do better is to take that insight and to build, to be able to make decisions off the back of it confidently. And so I was just wondering if there's any sort of maybe tips or techniques that you have for sort of doing that.
Just
like,
what industry is it?
Energy sector, B2B energy sector.
And it's B2B.
Yeah. So it's so for example, we were dealing with a lot of energy traders and things like that.
Right. So I guess, yeah, as you said, that's very niche. If you only speak to 3 to 4, the kind of questions that I would ask would be slightly different. So you might want to ask more things like, what actually happens in this journey for you? And then that's a real journey question, rather than, but I'd almost ask more transactional stuff to understand how the service works for them, and rather than how they feel, because that might not scale up with the other organizations as well.
Yeah,
I would almost just take the common insights that could be translated at scale and would be relevant to the others that you don't get to speak to. I guess that's one point. But then, of course, that also limits the kind of insight that you're going to get from them. So to Jason's point, you could also ask those other questions, but separate them out and know that you might have to take some of them with a pinch of salt, but it allows you to empathize with that person. So in terms of product design, you're doing more the end-to-end, and therefore asking those insight questions allows you to empathize, but I wouldn't make necessarily big decisions on that, or go in confidently to board and say, this is how people feel. But what I would do then is if you're only doing it with 3 to 4, then maximize that and go deeper with things like, recording sessions and having video content that you can then actually present back to board, because what that does is it allows the rest of the business to also empathize when it's a small scale. Yeah. Definitely don't take all the fine things with as like evidence, but at least allow people to relate to their customer base, and I think creates a customer-driven approach internally.
It makes sense. Like previously I was in a B2C situation where we would have 100,000 hits a month on the app. So we could, and it was very, very easy for us to find very large amounts of people to speak to. And so we're opposite end of the scale. And so I sort of find myself like, damn it, I need to evolve my practice here anyway.
Yeah. The other thing I would do, which we always recommend anyway, is speaking to competitor customers, because then you're getting a wider customer base, number one, and number two, you are getting insight that could be relevant and help you that you might not be getting from the customer base that you're speaking to now.
Cool, brilliant, thank you very much.
Sorry, I was just going to add to
Jason,
I know we need to go. I wonder how LinkedIn could be helpful as well, given it's a small industry, whether you could look at previous employees through that way.
We've hired a couple of them, so.
Well, there you go.
We do the same thing actually with LinkedIn. Yeah. So when we're working with a niche customer base, and it's related to role, we recruit through LinkedIn as well.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So I think we're going to end here. But before you guys go, we're going to thank first Veronica. Thank you so much. It was a great presentation. And you did patiently answer all our questions. But Jason is going to take us through the last thing here.
Okay, everybody. We're going to try some the other week at UCD gathering Scotland meetup group. They gave a talk about distance gatherings, and similar to Veronica's talk, it's about how we're adapting the things we do to an online medium. And actually Carmen and Lou have experienced this. It's called a waterfall chat. And so we're going to give you 2-3 minutes to write down one thing that you've learned and apply in your practice. So if you can hang on for a few moments, but we'd like you to write it into the chat, but don't send it. Okay. So at the end of those minutes, we'll say go, and everyone will hit return, and we'll see all the wonderful comments just cascade down. And what we'll do is you can save a copy using the 3 dots of the chat there. You can take away and look at afterwards, and we'll share it with you afterwards. So yeah, so if you can think about one thing that you've learned today that you would like to take away and use in your practice going forward, enter it into the chat, but don't hit return yet. Are you able to set a timer, Carmen or Lou?
Yep.
Lou did it.
And I'd just like to thank everyone for coming, and Veronica for speaking.
Thank you.
And Zebra for keeping us fee-free.
Running, which is, yeah, very good. Thank you, Veronica. We just had a few people that had to leave, but they just sent very nice messages. So we'll share the chat with you.
Oh, thank you.
We almost ended the first minute. If you really need to have more time, we'll do another couple of minutes. So we are halfway through of 3 minutes. If we are all, I'm not sure actually how we make.
If you have finished, can you do the thumbs up?
Yeah, maybe like if you want to sort of, yeah, exactly, thumbs up. So another minute left. Don't see many thumbs up yet. So you can hit reactions at the bottom of your screen. Get that. 2 seconds to go.
We good? Everyone hit return?
Ready? Go.
Oh, wow.
Oh, so cool.
Excellent.
Very good.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Chat as Jason just said earlier. Otherwise, we'll do it, and we'll just follow up with an email with a couple of things that came up with.
I think I just managed to send mine to someone privately by mistake. I don't know how I did that. Never mind.
This is still coming, things coming. Perfect. So it looks like, yeah, really, you guys got quite a lot of things from it.
Nice.
Fantastic.
Just reading them.
So we're officially over now, but if you'd like to stay for a little bit longer, you're quite welcome to.
Thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Catch you guys. Good
Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Hello, thanks for the presentation. It was very good. Could I quickly follow up my question? I didn't hear my name, so I didn't speak. And
Yeah,
when I heard you were saying it, you were already done. So I'm currently researching vulnerable populations. We are focusing on a group we had previous contact before the COVID-19 here in São Paulo, Brazil, but we lost contact with them because they don't usually have cell phones or computers, so we don't have online contact with them. And that's why I asked my question. Do you have other tools or methods for getting in touch with people remotely but not online? Because that's our biggest hurdle. We found so many methods online and so many things we could do, but we can't because it's online. So we're kind of lost here.
Yeah. So, I mean, the only examples we've used are home kits that we've sent or requests that we ask for. Are you talking about the recruitment side of things or actually running sessions, like how you actually get the insight?
More running sessions. We already know the people. It's just that we can't get in contact and do live sessions or online stuff. It's more about the second part.
So the only way that we've done that before is by sending kits. So kits could have disposable cameras that they have to send back. It has things like a kind of little booklet that you would create. They're not always diary studies, but those kind of things where you ask them to write this down every time this happens or whatever. Yeah, the only point I can think of is it has to be a physical thing. But you really need to design that differently because, again, the example I gave where you can't ask follow-up questions when you run a remote study, it's the same thing with that. Like, you can't deeper dive into certain things when, you know, you can't follow up with another question afterwards. So you have to be really smart with the way that you ask certain questions. You need to really build context into that. So, you know, if you can write why you're asking these questions and things like that, so that and you explain what you mean by this and what you mean by that, because you're not going to be able to explain it again, is really important. And then you get things sent back. If you run kits where it's usually more expensive to run these kind of studies, but if you ran kits where they'd have to send something back on a weekly basis, say for example, or after a day they have to send it back and then you ask them another one a week later, the benefit of doing that is that you can then vary the questions you ask based on the analysis that's come through from what they sent through in the previous kit. So you can evolve the research as you would if you were running it where it was more interactive. The only problem with doing it in that way is that it's not as interactive, and therefore you have to think of ways that you can ask things further or improve the study questions and things like that if you're not getting what you need out of it. So getting responses back as quickly as possible is key, so that you can then run a follow-up with them.
That's very valuable insight. Thank you. We were thinking along these lines. We were thinking maybe journaling or using disposable cameras, but we were thinking like just give it to them and let them use for as long as they need it, like a month or two. This idea of quick follow-ups and back and forth is very interesting. We didn't think of that. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome.
I wonder other access points within the community, like a library or something that might have internet. Are there other social, like public, digital? I don't know. You mentioned so that might not. That's explorations there, or through a health. Are there other physical proxies that you could access the other information?
Yeah, that's a good idea.
This is a good idea. They have a computer room in a facility they used to use, but thanks to the COVID-19, it's closed down and they are not using it. Maybe we can search for an alternative place they could go to use computers, but their own place with computers, they can't use it. But that's a good idea, is a proxy place.
De nada, no problem.
Obrigado.
Right. So there are no more questions. We thank you, Veronica, again. Great event. And we will pass your details on the group. And so if anyone wants to have a chat with you privately, then they can organize it. So thank you everyone for coming today. We hope to see you in future events.